Alright everybody, so today this is going to be the first episode of my new series. I'm going to be talking about true crime cases, missing persons, serial killers, this, that, and the other, everything involved in true crime. So I'm definitely going to do my best to not misrepresent anything about this case, but if you guys know anything about this case that I tell wrong in any way, go ahead and let me know in the comments. And also, if there's any cases you want me to discuss in the future, go ahead and let me know in the comments as well. I want to talk about some cases that, typically maybe haven't been discussed as much on YouTube. Alright, with that being said, I hope you guys enjoy. Allison Rook was a 60-year-old widow who lived alone in a flat made of red bricks with one pet on the north side of Frankston. Frankston is a suburb 25 miles south of Melbourne, Australia, and has a population of around 135,000 people. The north side of this suburb is known for being burdened with drug-related crimes, while the south end is known for its amazing views, large houses, and wealthy families. On May 30th, 1980, Allison was trying to go grocery shopping and then to meet her real estate agent to pay a bill. However, she was having car troubles and was not able to resolve the issue. Because of this, she decided to catch a bus. Allison would be seen walking towards the bus stop by some neighbors around 1 p.m. But as far as anyone knows, Allison never boarded her bus, never made it to the grocery store, and her real estate agent never saw her. Allison and her daughter Elaine had plans to watch Elaine's husband play in a country western band at a hotel that night. So Elaine had made multiple unanswered calls to her mother throughout the day. When Allison didn't respond all day, Elaine became worried that her mother might somehow be in her flat alone and hurt, so she called her brother and the two of them climbed through a window only to find that nothing appeared to be out of place. An empty beer bottle drank by Elaine the day before still sat in the sink untouched. 5 weeks went by until July 5th, 1980, when a man is walking his dogs through McClellan Drive in Frankston when he comes across the naked body of a woman partially hidden in shrubbery. When police investigated, they discovered this was the decomposed body of Allison Rook. In 1980, they were not able to pick up any forensic evidence off the body or even determine a cause of death, and its discovery ended up not providing any solid leads toward her killer. On August 10th, 1980, at around 10:15 a.m., a woman named Bertha Miller shouts to her brother-in-law, William, who is in the shower, that she is on her way to work and that she will be home late and not to wait for her to eat lunch. Bertha is spotted by a shopkeeper on her way to the tram, which is only about a quarter mile away from where she lives. She has made this walk at least once a week for over 10 years, but, just like the previous case, Bertha would never make it to her means of transportation and would never be seen again. Bertha and William lived together in Glen Norris, which is 30 miles north of Frankston. Bertha was a healthy and active 75-year-old woman who was extremely religious-oriented. Her pastor described her as a very humble woman. She was the church's treasurer, worked in the Sunday school, and donated what money she could to numerous Christian missions, and was the longest-serving member of the Spring Strait Mission in Melbourne, spanning over 40 years. Catherine Headland was born in England in 1965, but her family moved to Australia when she was just 1 year old. She lived with her mother and older brother in a rural area called Berwick, situated between Frankston and Glen Norris. Catherine was a very outgoing girl who loved riding horses and would compete with her beloved horse in local equestrian competitions. So I had a booger on my shirt and I just got rid of it. Alright. At 14, her mother made her choose between getting rid of her beloved horse or getting a job in order to help pay for the horse's maintenance. Catherine obviously chose work. Catherine's mother Hazel worked at a supermarket where she got her daughter a part-time job. Catherine usually only worked on weekends, but on August 28, 1980, she was on holiday break from school and scheduled to work her very first weekday shift. That day, Hazel woke up and left home for her 8:30 a.m. shift, leaving Catherine enough change for the bus. Just an hour later, Catherine would head out of the house. Her shift didn't start till 12, but she wanted to walk to her boyfriend's house and visit with him before work. Catherine had mentioned to her friends that she really didn't want to go to work that day, and that she was actually considering quitting because she wanted to be able to enjoy her social life outside of school. Catherine left John's house at 11:10 a.m., planning on boarding the 11:20 a.m. bus that would take her to work. Here's where things are going to differ a bit from the previous cases. Multiple witnesses come forward saying that they had seen Catherine after she left John's house. A bus driver was sure he had picked up a girl matching Catherine's description alongside another girl around her same age with blonde hair. The problem was the stop that he supposedly picked Catherine up at was half a mile away from the stop that Catherine was supposed to be taking to work. Other witnesses came forward to say that they had seen Catherine almost 5 miles from that original bus stop, still alongside this blonde girl around 2:30 p.m. Sketch artists made a sketch of this blonde girl and her image was released to the media, but she was never identified. Unfortunately, these sightings did not provide any leads, and police ended up deciding that they weren't credible enough to suggest that Catherine had actually made it onto the bus that day. Anne-Marie Sargent was 18 years old. She lived with family friends in the suburb of a fairly rural area between Frankston and Berwick, the area that Catherine went missing from. On October 6, 1980, an 18-year-old girl named Anne-Marie left her mother's house after visiting. She was on her way to the Commonwealth Employment Service site, where she was going to pick up an unemployment check. Anne was struggling to find a job at this point in her life and was collecting unemployment in the meantime. She told her mom that she would be back later to pick up some clothes, and it is documented that she did make it to her destination and was able to lodge a needed document. After she leaves this location, however, she is never seen or heard from again. Anne's father had a very strong feeling that Anne had been met with foul play, not only because of the recent disappearances, but also because he knew his daughter would regularly hitchhike to get around despite being offered bus fare by her family, and he also knew that on this particular day that she would have had to hitchhike in order to make it to her destination and back. Anne-Marie had also previously had an operation on the back of her skull that reportedly would have made it so that any blow to her head could potentially be fatal. Nurmal Stevenson was a 34-year-old immigrant from Thailand. Her husband Wayne was a Victorian dairy farmer that she had met and married in Thailand. She moved to a farm 83 miles southwest of Melbourne in 1979, leaving her 2 children in the care of her parents back in Thailand. Nurmal was not enjoying the United States and reportedly regretted moving here. On November 28, 1980, Nurmal and her husband traveled to Melbourne with another couple to see a concert, and they planned on staying with some friends afterwards. These friends lived in a house that was located between Glen Norris and Camberwell, only 6 miles from where Bertha Miller was last seen. The next day, the group went to another friend's residence, a flat about 11 miles away. When the group arrived at this flat, Nurmal refused to enter because she was upset at the rest of the group for going out and drinking when she had planned on cooking a Thai meal for them and had even gone to the market earlier that day for ingredients. The rest of the group, including her husband, went into the flat for coffee and whatnot while Nurmal stayed behind. Wayne checked up on Nurmal 3 separate times. On the second check, he had found her walking back to the car from a nearby 7-Eleven, and on the third check, he found her speaking her native language to a man inside of a car, although the man spoke with a European accent. After this final check, Wayne sat with his wife inside their car until almost the sun came up, but he eventually decided to go into the flat to get some rest. Nurmal still did not want to enter the flat, so she stayed behind. When Wayne came down to check on his wife around 6 a.m., she was no longer inside of the car. Up until this point, all of these cases had not yet been linked together, so when this missing person was reported to police, they didn't believe it was even a missing persons case. They believed that due to the circumstances, it was likely Nurmal had walked off on her own. But things would change 1 week later on December 6th, when 2 men are walking down a path in an area of scrub in Tynong, North Australia. They're only a little over 30 miles from where the body of Alison Rook had been discovered. The two men are searching for a discreet location to leave the remains of the lambs they had slaughtered earlier that day where local wildlife would be able to benefit from it. The men split up and one of them starts walking down a wallaby track when he spots something that completely shocks him. Once he realizes what he is looking at, he starts yelling at the other man that he has discovered a body. But then he looks closer and discovers that there's actually two bodies. Just like Allison and Joy, the bodies had not been buried. They had rather been hidden in thick scrub and foliage. When they were uncovered by police, they were identified as the bodies of Anne Marie Sargent and Bertha Miller. Just like the cases before, the bodies were already too far along in the process of decomposition to determine a cause of death. But unlike the bodies before, these two were noted to have been placed neatly, face up, with one arm across their body and the other down at their side. Anne Marie Sargent was found undressed, while Bertha Miller still had her clothing on. Her body was covered in branches that had been cut down with a saw. A search of the area that was conducted the next day uncovered the body of Catherine Headland less than a mile away. Just like Anne Marie, she was naked and her body was badly decomposed. After these discoveries, the media was quick to try to make a connection between these three victims and the notorious Truro murders. In this case, 7 women were killed in South Australia between December 1976 and February 1977. However, Chief Inspector Paul DeLeonis, the head of the Victorian Homicide Squad, was quick to deny the similarities between these two cases and insisted this was a local problem and that the department was not overlooking the idea that there could already be others dead in the hands of this killer. After the autopsies were performed, detectives were surprised to discover the age gap between these women. The motive behind these crimes was previously thought to be sexual, and while this idea wasn't totally discarded, the discovery of this age gap forced the department to look at other possibilities of a motive. At this time, police were also looking into the possibility that the Alison Rook case in Frankston could be related. Police headquarters located in central Melbourne proceeded to set up a special operations room to oversee this case. Over 25 members of the police department were involved in the commencing investigation. In the early days of the investigation, a roadblock was set up near Bertha Miller's home in order to question local residents about the situation. Fortunately, this tactic did end up providing investigators with a vital piece of information. Investigators learned that Bertha had allegedly accepted rides from multiple strangers in the past, despite William, her brother, stating that she was not the type of person to do such a thing. Another roadblock was set up in the area Anne Marie Sargent was last known to be collecting her unemployment check. After this roadblock, as well as a similar experiment where Catherine had gone missing, police issued a statement to the media stating that they would like to question a man who drives a white taxi. Witnesses came forward to state that they had actually seen a white van near the sites where the bodies were found at times that would coincide with the killings. Chief Inspector Paul DeLeonis stated he believed the killer may have been using this taxi in order to trick women into trusting him enough to give them a ride, but police were not able to locate the white taxi or the driver they were searching for. On October 9, 1981, 11 months after the discovery of Anne, Catherine, and Bertha, a woman named Joy Summers was enjoying her Friday just like any other. Joy Summers lived less than a mile from Alison Rook in North Frankston, but the two reportedly did not know each other. However, what they did have in common was that they were both widows who lived alone. Typically on Fridays, Joy would go grocery shopping with her friend William because she didn't like grocery shopping alone. However, on this particular day, William had medical appointments to attend, so he would not be able to make his standing appointment with Joy. Joy decided on this day she would simply catch a bus and go shopping alone. She wanted to be able to pick her own cuts of lamb from her favorite butcher on Wells Street. The bus stop Joy was heading towards was only a little over 300 feet from her house. Neighbors spotted her heading towards that bus stop around 1 p.m. At around 1:20, she's even spotted waiting at the bus stop. But just like Allison, she would never make it onto that bus, and she would never be seen alive again. Police believed right away that the cases of Joy Summers and Alison Rook were connected. They believed both of these women had to either been physically abducted or somehow coerced into a vehicle while waiting for the bus. But Joy's friend William was adamant that Joy would not willingly accept a ride from a stranger. Unfortunately, no solid leads are discovered, and both of these cases, not even being officially linked yet, have went cold. This was until December of 1988 when Catherine Headland's family receives an ominous and puzzling Christmas card in the mail. Inside, a message is handwritten for the family. It says, "I hope in writing to you, I do not cause you or your family any stress. I can't comprehend the pain, the agony you have endured to have lost a loved one, Catherine. Not knowing whether or if the perpetrator, single or plural, will ever be caught. Well, the new year may be a good one for you. Things may unfold. The name of the perpetrator, whose deeds make Truro look like kid stuff. I'll keep in touch sometime in the new year. Signed, Anonymous Friend." 5 months later, a typed letter is received by the Victorian Police Commissioner at the time. The letter says, "Is the Tynong file gathering dust? Have you ran into a dead end? Need help?" With a multitude of questions but very few answers. "Did you know you are dealing with a mass murder on scale never seen in this country? Only the top American serial killers surpass this cold-blooded killer. Did you know, name censored by police, was another victim? And others across 3 states? Did you find the brooch Miller was wearing on the day of her murder? Or the pair of sterling silver blue earrings belonging to Catherine?" Police had in fact found the earrings being discussed in the letter, which added to its legitimacy. But eerily enough, they had not found the brooch of Bertha Miller. The sister of Anne-Marie Sargent was quoted saying, "He's still out there, and he's playing games with us now. Until he's caught, I don't think anybody involved in the whole thing can rest. We continually think about it. It's there with us every day. Every time we go to the cemetery, it's there." After the contents of these letters were released to the media, a great deal of people came forward with potential new information. Again, persons of interest were interviewed, and some cars were even forensically tested, but no arrests were made. Police departments from around Australia were beginning to look for similarities between the Tynong case and any cases in their district. And the theory began to materialize that this could be the work of a killer who was operating along Australian highways since as far back as 1972. But on June 5th, 1989, a wrench would be thrown into all the progress being made when police successfully identify the author of these letters and discover that he is not in fact the killer, but rather a man who was serving time in a Melbourne penitentiary. This person told police he wrote these letters because he felt sympathy for the families of the victims. The name that had been censored by police was the name of a woman that had sometimes been theorized in the media to be connected to the case. However, this woman's husband was successfully convicted of her murder years later. After the author of the letters had been revealed, the case once again lost all its momentum and began to lie dormant in the files and on desktops of police. In 1999, a new task force is put together to oversee the case of Tynong North murders and their possible connection to the cases of Alison Rook and Joy Summers. This task force was codenamed Lyndhurst. Regardless of all evidence suggesting these cases were linked, a 1985 analysis of the case determined that there was most likely 3 separate killers, stating, "The person or persons who placed the first 3 victims at the Brew roadside near the sand quarry at Tynong North were more particular at selecting a site at which to dispose of the bodies. An isolated site off a little used road, a considerable distance from the nearest main road, was selected. He was prepared to take the victim a considerable distance from where he picked them up before disposing of the body. This could indicate that the offender responsible for the deaths of the first 3 women at Tynong North had given some thought as to how and where he might dispose of the body, and suggest he may have planned to commit a particular offense if and when the opportunity arose." This analyst would also explain that this was a very distinct difference from the other cases, being that they were so much closer to a heavily used road. This suggested that the killer did not have a place in mind to dispose of the body and instead just used the first decent location he could find. The first 3 bodies found at Tynong North were also positioned in a very particular way. If you recall, Bertha Miller and Anne-Marie Sargent were laying head to toe right beside each other and placed in copycat positions with one arm across their chest and one arm at their side. In this case, there are 3 main suspects. One suspect is typically referred to as the Miller suspect. Bertha Miller's nephew, Mick Miller, was a former homicide detective and a lecturer of students at the detective training school. Before his retirement, he tried his best not to involve himself in the case due to his personal connection. After he retired in 1987, he began opening up publicly about his opinions on the case. He lobbied for the case to be re-examined, which reportedly is what inspired the formation of the Lyndhurst Task Force in '89. Miller's suspect should not be named publicly, but to sum things up, this man gave an alibi to police that led to them dismissing him as a person of interest. He told police he had been working at the times that Anne-Marie Sargent and Catherine Headland had gone missing, and he had a time card to prove it. But when Miller re-examined this explanation, he discovered employees of this person's place of work would often be able to punch their time card and then leave work, or even have someone else punch their time card and not show up at all. What's noteworthy about this suspect is that he personally knew Catherine Headland and seemed to have mutual friends or connections with Anne-Marie Sargent, and even had indirect ties to Bertha Miller. This man would have been in his 20s at the time of the murders and living inside of what was called the Killer's Triangle, which is a triangle that could be drawn from Frankston to Cranbourne to Berwick, where all of these crimes took place. Although the anonymous Christmas card sent to Headland's family and the following letter sent to the police appeared to be a dead end, it did lead to the second suspect we will be discussing. Although the letter writer himself was dismissed as a suspect, what's interesting to note is that while serving time in Pentridge Prison, he found himself being the cellmate of a well-known criminal by the name of Raymond Edmonds. Edmonds is often referred to by the media as Mr. Stinky. Edmonds was arrested for the murder of 2 teenagers in 1985, but his crimes were committed back in 1966. After his initial conviction, he was also convicted of 5 separate cases of rape, and it is believed he could be responsible for 32 counts of rape altogether. When questioned, the anonymous letter writer reportedly told police that Edmonds had bragged to him about many unsolved cases, which led him to believe that Edmonds was the person responsible for the bodies found at Tynong North. Police investigated this possibility, but weren't able to definitively link him to the case, and Edmonds profusely denies any involvement in these crimes or any crimes besides the ones he has been convicted for. The third suspect is considered the main suspect of this case. Due to legal reasons, he cannot be named, but he is often referred to in the past as Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith was a member of a somewhat radical Christian church. In 1980, his home was situated between Allison Rook and Joy Summers in Frankston. He even would have to pass by Joy's house to get to the main road, and it is likely he would have seen Joy before. The bodies of Joy and Allison were found just around the corner from his house. In fact, a square could be drawn with each corner being placed on Joy's house, Allison's house, the site of their 2 bodies, and in the center of the square, you would be able to find Mr. Smith's house. Another sketchy fact surrounding this suspect is that 3 witnesses had come forward stating that a van matching the description that the van Mr. Smith drove had offered them a ride, but they had turned it down. Mr. Smith was brought in for questioning just a couple of weeks after the disappearance of Joy Summers. When police informed him that witnesses had come forward to report that he had offered them rides in the past, he admitted that he often offered rides to anyone who was walking along the highway, but especially older females. When police questioned him further, Mr. Smith said that he just wanted to be friendly and have someone to talk to. He even cited drugs being in schools and kids causing trouble as some of the reasons he might want to offer someone a ride. What's interesting to note is that he was not known to offer rides to people in the years prior to the murder of Allison Rook. 12 hours after this initial interview, Mr. Smith decides to call the Criminal Investigation Branch in Frankston to tell them he had remembered something new about the day Joy went missing. He said about 12 o'clock that day, he went to the bank with his wife to get some money. He would have drove down Dandenong Road, but he didn't see anything suspicious or else he would have remembered. The bank clerk, however, could not corroborate this story. This clerk even testified at coronial inquest that no money had been withdrawn that day from his account and that there was no record of him entering the bank that day. Both Joy and Allison went missing before 1:30 p.m. and on those days, Mr. Smith had been scheduled to work at 4 p.m. After the body of Joy Summers had been discovered, Mr. Smith is again paid a visit by police officers who ask him if he is aware of Joy Summers' body being found or of the case of Allison Rook. Mr. Smith denies knowledge of either of these events, saying that he doesn't read the papers or watch TV. He also told police he was not familiar with Sky Road, the road Joy and Allison had been found along, and he even said he had never been there. Police knew this was a lie because Mr. Smith had worked at a movie theater located on Sky Road. Mr. Smith was brought to the locations of the bodies to examine his reaction. It was noted that he carefully avoided stepping over the exact locations of the bodies, and he appeared visibly nervous and sweaty. Upon further questioning, Mr. Smith told police he had offered around 50 plus people rides over the course of the last 18 months. He said the vast majority of people did not accept a ride from him and that only 6 women had accepted a ride from him in that time. During one interview with police, Smith stated he was not a sex maniac and that he resents the implication he would ever be one. When police remind Smith that he had previously been convicted for soliciting a sex worker while he was married, Smith defended himself by saying that he merely cuddled with the woman and that he was lonely at the time. Further investigations would show that Smith was a regular at certain locations where someone could solicit a sex worker. And he even went as far as to put ads in the newspaper saying that he just wanted to watch other people have sex. When asked if he had tried to give a ride to Joy Summers, Smith couldn't definitively say if he had or not, but he denies that he would ever kill her if he had. After this interview, Smith decides to lawyer up and no longer work with police. But not too long after this, Mr. Smith enters the Frankston Police Department and speaks to a senior constable at the station of his own free will. To much surprise, he asked why he's only been questioned about 2 murders and not 5 murders. When asked which other 3 murders he was talking about, he mentions the 3 bodies that had been found at Tynong North. It turns out that Mr. Smith had not only lived in Frankston, but before that he lived in Garfield, a town that was connected to Tynong North. Witnesses stated his black van had been spotted parked outside of a friend's house around the period of time when the 4 Tynong murder victims went missing. Smith also had a job as a truck driver, where he would often drive down the very track where the first 3 bodies had been discovered at Tynong North. Due to the fact that there was only circumstantial evidence, Mr. Smith could not be brought to trial, and it is very controversial among members of Australian police departments whether or not he was the killer or whether or not there were possibly 2 killers or 3. Mr. Smith would later be busted yet again trying to solicit a sex worker and was brought in by police. At this time, Mr. Smith took it upon himself to mention that he was the suspect in a murder case. 2 polygraphs would be given to Smith in which the results would suggest that he was being deceptive. Police state that DNA evidence, along with other evidence, has turned this investigation in a promising new direction and that there is still hope for justice. Police have revealed that they are honing in on one particular suspect, but would not state who that suspect is. Today, a $1 million reward is in place for information that solves the case of each individual victim, the largest that has ever been offered in any Victorian investigation. A suspect who will not be identified, but is an 85-year-old man, came out on the very same day that this reward was announced to profess his innocence, stating that he never knew the victims and that he worked 2 long hours to be able to commit these crimes. Alrighty. So that took a lot of research and yeah, a lot more work than I ever anticipated, but thank you guys for watching. I hope in some way this could help to lead to some resolution for the families involved in these cases and maybe solve this case. So yeah, everybody just stay safe out there and have a good day.